Part of my work is to train others in using coaching skills for leadership. So not only do we share tools and techniques, we also share practical models and means of ensuring we stay fully present to everything we're experiencing in the moment. Now, this isn't about turning leaders into coaches per se. It's about sharing some of those core skills, like how to really listen. And how we listen is what underpins great communication. So people can lead others and themselves even more effectively. And of course, not every conversation is a coaching conversation. But in general, when we stop trying to tell others what to do and instead listen really deeply to their thoughts, their observations, and allow them to apply their experience in its full breadth to whatever the issue is that they're working through, there's a better outcome for everybody. And in an organisational context, there's a better outcome for the team member, the team, the leader, the organisation, and the end client. So listening is possibly the greatest skill that I help leaders develop. And for me personally, it's been one of the most important skills my coaching studies have given me, are still giving me, because of course we never ever stop learning. And the model that we tend to use when we're training this stuff in is something called level 3 or global listening. So when we listen at level 1, we're only really listening to ourselves. We might be taking on information, but it's generally only stuff that we can grab hold of and apply to our own thoughts, our own experience. We're not listening jointly. It's not a collaborative experience, and we're not participating as an equal in the conversation. And the impact when we're listening at level 1 on the other person, when they sense that they're not really being listened to, can make it feel like a really shallow exchange. And you often see it in as a kind of dramatic device on TV or in films where two characters are talking at each other, both telling separate stories, but neither of them are listening. And level 1 is really when we're using the other person's words as a launch pad for what we want to say. And we can often see it at play, at home, at work, socially. And if you've ever felt that someone is physically present and looking like they're listening, but their responses are all about them, it's probably level 1. So their ears are working, but all they're doing is scanning the words you're saying to see where it's of interest to them. And that will be the detail that they pick up on, picking out how they can apply some aspect of what you're saying to their own life experience. And actually it's interesting, as I share these 3 levels of listening, just notice if there's any kind of particular conversation that you've had recently that resonates against either level 1, level 2 or level 3. So then we have level 2 listening. And this is where we're listening really intently to the other person. We put ourselves aside. We just hear their words without the intrusion of our thoughts. We're really focused, we're very present, and we're really determined to stay that way. So we're really, really listening. We're very intent. We hear what's being said. We respond accordingly in line with what we've heard. We might notice that the other person's body language is more attuned to us. when someone's listening at level 2. We might notice that they're really looking at us, that they're nodding and understanding, and that their questions are actually directly related to what we're saying. And there is no denying that shifting from level 1 to level 2 is great. It's awesome. And getting to level 2 means that level 3 starts becoming within reach. And level 3 is what we call global listening. And it's where really powerful communication happens. And it means listening to others in the context of their entire surroundings. So not just their words, but their intonation, their body language, their micro facial expressions, and every other cue that we have available that helps us interpret what we're hearing. And it means listening to our own internal response to what we're seeing and hearing, and using all of that awareness, that self-awareness, to really help us listen even more deeply to the other person. So we can describe it as those times when we notice when we're making a judgment about what someone else has said inside our heads. And in the same moment of noticing, we're able to put that judgment to one side so it doesn't skew how we interpret what we're hearing, but we're still aware of what's going on for us and our response to what we're hearing. And it's incredibly powerful when someone listens to us at level 3, and it's really what we do in coaching. It's what I practice when I'm working with my clients, and it's also the experience that I've had of working with my own coaches over the time that I've worked with them. So when someone listens to us from level 3, the impact is just so awesome. And it's when we know we are really, really being heard fully. So what on earth has all of this got to do with today's topic, which is all about gossip? Well, gossip is something we often lean toward. So we love to listen to stories about other people that we know, whether we know them directly or through their celebrity status. That's why clickbait is such a powerful pull for people. Or perhaps we know people because of the importance they hold in someone else's life, or someone that we value, the importance they hold in their life. And gossip is something that can really activate our level 1 and level 2 listening skills. So we all love a story, and there is plenty of research out there on why we naturally engage in stories, and often stories involve people. That's what we're curious about. And in coaching or leadership or any conversation with a family member, a friend or a stranger, where we want to create a meaningful outcome, storytelling is a really rich pool where we can find connection with others. However, when I was considering this, my feeling was that there's an area around that rich pool of storytelling that might seep into a slightly boggy land of gossip. And I think it's a fascinating and sometimes obscure divide between the two. Where does something transition from kind of storytelling into gossip? And this isn't to say that gossip doesn't have its purpose, and I'm going to talk about that shortly, because it does. But my sense is that simply noticing when the conversation starts straying into the land of, ooh, have you heard, could be something that really serves us and also serves the quality of the conversation and the communication that we have with others. So before I go on, I just want to be really, really super clear here. I'm talking about something that's quite subtle. And this reflection on what may benefit from our attention, it's not about the type of gossip that is when someone shares someone else's confidence or secret, or they speak maliciously about another person who isn't there. You know, we all already know why that doesn't benefit us. Like, we can feel that. We know what's going on there. But this is an attempt, as with so many of these episodes, to explore a much subtler realm of when things tip into a place where part of us might start to feel a bit of discomfort. And my own sense is that even as I began thinking about this and writing this episode, I noticed that it was sparking some discomfort for me, like a resistance to even kind of talking about it, to sharing it. And you may notice some discomfort as you listen to this episode. But it's when we get those kind of cues in our body that I think there's something asking for our attention rather. So I'm turning toward it, and maybe there's something in here that you'll find useful in some way as well. So I once heard a highly respected mindfulness teacher and Buddhist tell the story of when they were younger, in their early 20s, and they'd first begun exploring the realm of Buddhism and what it meant for them. And they attempted an experiment to not participate in any conversation that involved a third party who wasn't present in the room. And their reflection was that it is incredibly hard to do, and they quickly found themselves having very few conversations. And after I heard this story, I had a brief go myself, and the experiment was only successful in that it helped highlight the same thing, you know, that it's really hard to have a conversation or to have, like, all our conversations only about either people who are present with us, and never sort of, you know, touching on anything to do with someone who wasn't physically there. And the awareness of that experiment has really stuck with me. And every now and then my thoughts return to it, and it's really what led to writing this episode. And just to be really clear, this doesn't mean I never talk about other people, because clearly I do. When you live in a remote house with just one other person, it would be very hard to maintain ongoing communication if you never discussed any topic that included mention of someone who wasn't there in person. So while I'd encourage everyone to have a go at the experiment, my sense is you might pretty much be doing it knowing it wasn't sustainable. Because, you know, talking about other people, it's hardwired into us. And there is plenty of evidence that gossip brings us enormous value in terms of social connection. And this is really, really important. You know, the power of how we connect with other humans is absolutely vital for our well-being. And I think it's interesting as well that gossip hasn't always been a pejorative term. So in Shakespeare's time, A gossip was someone who sat with a woman through childbirth, perhaps to talk or to offer comfort or just to help her as she waited for the hours for for birth to happen. And even though Blaise Pascal once observed, if people really knew what others said about them, there would not be 4 friends left in the world. Research shows that the majority of gossip is actually not malicious. It's a broad term that defines all the things we say about others when they're not around. So my own reflection is that we also use the storytelling of gossip as a way of remembering who's who in our complex social groups. So this is my theory. This isn't. If you find any evidence of this, I'd be interested. Thank you. It'd be great if you could send it. So what we do is when we meet someone, we tend to say, "Oh, you're the one who," etc., etc. And we've all met friends of friends who've said, "I've heard lots about you." And the required answer, of course, is being all good, I hope. So it's something that we do to create this connection in our complex social groups. But what good does it actually do for us? And there's an article that I'm going to share in the notes about some work from a psychology professor called Frank T. McAndrew. And he summarises that there are 3 core benefits to gossip. So first of all, it helps us bond with our friends. So the act of gossiping, talking, listening, sharing stories, it helps us form friendships and distinctive group identities, so what we might call a tribe these days. Interestingly, one of the things he says is that although women are often labelled with the term gossip, both genders actually take part, and we generally prefer hearing gossip about people of the same gender as us. This is what his findings have shown. But men are more likely to share gossip mainly with their romantic partners. And it might be one of the reasons people who identify as female tend to form stronger social connections. And, huge generalisation here, of course, just sort of like alert on that. But women can sometimes, often be seen to have wider social networks than men. And it might be because of this ability to share these stories and bond with friends. So that's the first one. The second one is also it teaches us lessons. So most of us relate better to stories than to raw data. And gossip is a form of storytelling. It's an interpersonal folklore. But instead of once upon a time, we say, "Did you hear about so-and-so?" So by hearing and sharing stories, we learn about social norms and conventions of those around us, and we learn how to act and how not to act in certain situations. So if you've ever, moved to a new country or somewhere where the culture is very different from where you grew up, then understanding and listening to stories can be a really powerful way of working out what are the rules here, how do I behave in order to fit in, to belong, etc. And then the third one is it keeps us in line. I think this is a really interesting one. So gossip can actually be a kind of deterrent. This is what this professor's research has shown. It's a kind of deterrent or a punishment against those who deviate from the norms and values of a group. So it is really tough being the one who's being negatively gossiped about, or the one who's been excluded because of a nasty rumour. So the social pressure keeps us from veering too far away from the norms, inverted commas, of the group. We don't want to be the one who's gossiped about. And if you just think about the school playground, or if you've ever been unfortunate enough to be in an adult environment where those negative behaviours still play out, then we can see, the impact of gossip around the water cooler or on social media, of course. However, the research says that positive gossip can also encourage cooperation among people in a group. So it keeps us in line in terms of, it stops us stepping out of line, but it also encourages positive cooperation. So it has value there. And another bit of research that I came across when I was exploring this topic for us all was, there's an anthropologist and evolutionary psychologist called Robin Dunbar, and he claims that our primate ancestors bonded through grooming. So their mutual back scratching, and this is something that we're all aware of, I think, these days. Mutual back scratching ensures mutual self-defense in the event of attack by predators, etc. But as hominids grew more intelligent and more social, so our human ancestors, their groups became too large to unite by grooming alone. And that's where language and gossip, broadly defined, stepped in. So Dunbar argues that idle chatter with and about others gave early humans a sense of shared identity, and it helped them grow and become more aware of their environment, thus incubating this sort of complex higher functioning that we now have as the people that we are, with our enormous brains, as complex higher functioning that sits at the front of our brain, just behind our forehead. So, looking across all of that, and there's lots and lots and lots of more evidence, gossip is good. Except when it isn't. And my sense is that bringing our attention to it could be beneficial in the way that we feel, both about ourselves and about others. And we know that stress hormones like adrenaline and cortisol, they leave markers on our body. And while both of these hormones are absolutely vital for our day-to-day functioning and our survival, excess of either can be toxic in our system. And my feeling is that spending our time negatively discussing the shortcomings of others could also have an impact on our own system. So just noticing how our body feels when we're really joyful to how we feel when we're shocked or disgusted or disappointed gives us a clue to what might be happening. And, and to expand on that, really, just think about the experience that many, many people have through channels like Twitter or Facebook or Instagram, where they're gossiped about. And for me, and also what's the impact of the people doing the gossiping, that idea of the troll. How does it feel to be the person who is doing the trolling? The impact on their system must be detrimental, my sense is. And for me, gossip is really what much of the news is too. It's got this kind of patina of seriousness and respectability, but really much of it is just a more formalised way of saying, did you see what so-and-so did? Or, have you heard? Though, of course, I suppose, going back to some of those reasons why gossip is good, perhaps knowing that you might end up on the news at 10 could be something that dissuades some people from stepping too far across moral boundaries. So it's, it's an interesting, well, I find it an interesting topic to explore, like where are the edges of these different experiences. And if we come back to our day-to-day lives, my sense is that there is room for work here. So that's work with a capital W. Something that, if you've ever read any Eckhart Tolle, then you'll have heard he talks of the pain body. And he describes it as the place where we store all of our hurt and trauma and pain that we've experienced in our life. And my wondering here is whether part of what draws us to gossip that's tipped over into that slightly kind of boggier land that I was talking about, part of what draws us to that gossip is this exquisite activation of that pain body's memories. Maybe there's some schadenfreude that appears here, or a very human response of there but for the grace of God go I. But my sense is that when we participate in gossip that activates that response within us, it's actually a way of kind of creating a sense of superiority over others. Maybe there's this is where it starts to feel a bit uncomfortable. Maybe there's an egoic state of saying, well, I'm better than that person, even if it's just in the moment of listening or participating in that story or in that gossip. This kind of, this bit of us, the ego that just endlessly wants to prove that we're better than other people. And really, at the heart of all this, my sense is that in a world where creating equanimity and equality feels a much healthier goal, just being aware of when that stuff is rising up within us can only be a good thing, because from there we can make a choice. So how do we actually move beyond that learnt behaviour? It's hardwired into us. It's a learnt behaviour. We're socially taught this the techniques of gossip and participating in this kind of like mutual storytelling. How do we create a useful shift, even if it's a very, very subtle thing? And first of all, I think it's really essential that we don't beat ourselves up. Self-compassion is key, always, of course, so that we don't beat ourselves up when we notice that we've been gossiping in some way, where it's like just shifted into a place that has begun to feel a bit uncomfortable for us. Adding guilt on top of shame about a situation is rarely a great outcome. So just noticing what's going on is useful, but not in a way that we're being pejorative about ourselves. But we can use our self-awareness to help us notice when a conversation feels like gossip in whatever way we are choosing to define it ourselves. And when the conversation is simply story sharing for social bonding, understanding the enormous value that has. And this, my darlings, is where we come back to listening. And it's the reason for my introduction when I was talking about the level 1, level 2, level 3 listening. So level 3 listening. When we're listening to our own internal response to what we're seeing and hearing in the moment, and using all of that incredible awareness that we can develop in order to help us listen even more deeply to the other person. That, my sense is, that is what can help us tell the difference when a story starts to shift into the boggier land of gossip, and away from that rich pool of social connection. So this whole topic of gossip is something I've been just sort of noodling over, and I'm quite fascinated about it personally. And it's something that, in client conversations as well, I don't need to know the full details of a story that's happened in a client's life in order to be able to support them as they work through how they want to move on from that experience, or what they want to learn from that experience, or whatever it might be. Because if I start getting involved in the detail and the he said, she said, there's a danger that I start getting involved in gossip about someone who isn't there, and that doesn't serve anybody. So through my work, I'm very mindful and adept at staying outside of those stories and just being able to use that level 3 listening to observe, okay, well, what's actually going on here? What's going on underneath the story for this client, and how can I best support them with their reflections? So we tend not to get lost in, the detail of what happened, but really we're just interested about what's the human response that person has had. And I think, but when we look into our kind of day-to-day lives, that's me professionally, but I know that in my day-to-day life over the last 50 years, I'll have participated in conversations that afterwards I know I've beaten myself up about, where I've perhaps even contributed actively, and then later felt a sense of like, oh, I really wish, we hadn't talked about that, or I wish I hadn't said that, or I wish I hadn't been there when that conversation was going on. And it's a really, really hard thing to admit. It feels deeply uncomfortable to share that with you. But I also recognise that's my little girl, and it's my little girl sort of going like, oh, I did something wrong. So, it's just a very, very human thing. And none of us like to see or admit to any behaviours that feel less than, sort of honourable. But it's part of our glorious humanness, our perfect imperfections, to witness and to observe the full breadth of who we are is important. And so all of this, everything that I've said, and all of my own kind of emotional responses to the thoughts, the reflections that I've had, and I hope all of your personal reflections are all without judgment, simply noticing with deep compassion. And it's with the noticing, it's with this ever expanding, deepening self-awareness comes our ability to make a change, even if it's like the tiniest, subtlest shift, if that's something that feels right for us to do. So I hope you enjoyed today's exploration. Feels quite a rich and and complex topic to me. And obviously these are simply my observations, and the research that I've been doing myself. And as ever, I would love to hear if you've got any reflections yourself, whether that's agreeing or noticing, oh yes, that sparked a thought, or disagreeing. I'm very open. Got broad shoulders. You can tell me anything. So yeah, let's leave it there today. And just as a I think that's it. Actually, I was going to share another thought, and then it just completely popped out of my head. So let's leave it there. All right, my darlings. I send you a hug and a wave.